In 1492, Christopher Columbus reached the Americas under the Spanish crown. What followed was not just exploration, but the beginning of a flow of gold and silver so massive, it would build one of the most powerful empires in history. Within decades, Spain was flooded with unimaginable wealth, more gold and silver than any European power had ever seen before. Ships crossed the Atlantic carrying treasure on a scale that seemed almost impossible at the time. Entire fleets were organized around transporting this wealth safely back to Europe. This was not a single event, but a continuous process that reshaped the balance of power. But that wealth did not just create power, it changed everything. At the end of the 15th century, Spain was not yet the dominant force in Europe. It had recently unified under a single crown and was still consolidating its internal structure. Other powers, including France and the Holy Roman Empire, remained strong competitors on the continent. Spain's position was uncertain, but it now had access to something entirely new. It was connected to lands that would transform its future. The Americas were vast, rich in resources, and largely unknown to European powers at the time. Exploration quickly shifted into expansion, and expansion into control. This transition happened faster than most contemporary observers could fully understand. Spanish expeditions moved deeper into the American continents, searching for wealth and influence. They encountered powerful civilizations, including the Aztecs in Central America and the Inca in South America. Through a combination of military force, alliances, and disease, these empires were defeated. But conquest alone was not the main objective. The real objective was extraction. Spanish forces began to collect gold and silver on a scale that had never been seen before in Europe. Mines, such as Potosi, became central to this system, producing vast quantities of silver for export. Entire labor systems were organized around extraction, forcing local populations into mining, refining, and transport. This system required constant expansion and continuous labor to sustain its output. It was not temporary. It became the foundation of Spain's growing empire. Over time, the scale of this operation continued to expand, feeding an increasingly complex global network. As wealth increased, Spain's political structure became more centralized and more powerful. The monarchy expanded its authority and strengthened its position within Europe. Overseas territories were organized into colonies, governed through a structured imperial system. Trade routes connected these territories, forming a network that spanned multiple continents. Spain was no longer a regional kingdom. It had become a global empire. This transformation placed Spain at the center of emerging global dynamics. This new wealth allowed Spain to build one of the most powerful military systems of its time. Armies were funded, equipped, and deployed across Europe and beyond. The Spanish Navy protected trade routes and ensured the steady flow of resources across the Atlantic. Military strength reinforced political authority and expanded territorial control. Spain could now engage in large-scale conflicts that smaller powers could not sustain. War became both a tool of expansion and a constant drain on resources. Spanish influence spread rapidly across Europe, the Americas, and parts of Asia. Its empire stretched across continents, connected through trade, governance, and military presence. Silver and gold from the Americas became the foundation of its economic power. For a time, Spain appeared unstoppable. Its wealth was unmatched, and its influence was global. This dominance created the impression of permanence, even as underlying pressures began to form. At its peak, Spain stood at the center of a global economic system. Its cities expanded, its administration grew stronger, and its monarchy projected power across continents. Trade routes carried goods, wealth, and information between Europe, the Americas, and Asia. Silver from the Americas circulated through Europe and reached markets as far as China. This created one of the earliest truly global economic networks. Spain's influence extended far beyond its borders, shaping international trade, diplomacy, and financial systems. Merchant networks expanded, and global markets became more interconnected than ever before. For a time, it appeared that Spain controlled the flow of global wealth itself. Its power seemed stable, supported by continuous access to resources and expanding global connections. But the system that created Spain's power also introduced serious weaknesses. The massive influx of gold and silver led to widespread inflation within Spain's economy. Prices increased rapidly, and the value of money declined over time. Instead of strengthening domestic production, Spain became dependent on imported goods. Wealth flowed through the empire, but it did not always create sustainable growth. At the same time, continuous wars placed enormous strain on resources and administration. The empire relied on a constant flow of wealth to maintain its position. When that flow slowed, the system began to weaken. Over time, Spain's dominance began to decline as other European powers adapted and expanded. Trade routes shifted, and new competitors emerged on the global stage. Military defeats weakened Spain's influence and reduced its control over key territories. The empire struggled to maintain its vast structure across continents. Administrative complexity increased, while efficiency began to decline. Internal economic weaknesses made recovery more difficult with each passing generation. As resources became less reliable, the foundation of its power began to erode. Spain did not collapse suddenly. Its decline was gradual, shaped by internal pressures and external competition. Over generations, its position shifted from dominance to participation within a changing global system. The Spanish Empire rose through access to extraordinary wealth from the Americas. But that wealth carried long-term consequences that were not immediately visible. Instead of creating lasting stability, it introduced structural weaknesses into the system. This is the central lesson of the Spanish Empire. Power built on extraction alone is difficult to sustain over time. For a period, Spain controlled the flow of global wealth on an unprecedented scale. But in the end, that same wealth reshaped the empire in ways it could not control.